comes. Here he comes. There he is. There he is.
On this Tuesday night, Donald Trump charged with criminal offenses.
It's sad, and we're going to fight it.
The case against the former president, plus the security concerns and dueling demonstrations. Gruesome find at a Manitoba landfill. The investigation into the discovery of another Indigenous woman's body. Protesters raising awareness about human rights abuses in China. The allegations they've been harassed here in Canada for speaking out.
It is widespread.
And failure to launch, why Virgin's rocket business has plummeted into bankruptcy.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
High drama in a New York City courtroom today. Former U.S. President Donald Trump is now a defendant in a criminal case, charged with 34 felony counts. No other former U.S. president has ever been in this situation. Good evening and thanks for joining us. Trump pleaded not guilty to all counts today. The case centers on an alleged scheme that involved falsifying business records to bury negative stories about Trump before the 2016 election. Trump on social media had already claimed the case is political and accused the New York district attorney of being a psychopath. The onus is now on Trump himself, who is running for president again, to defend himself in court. Jackson Proskow is in Manhattan tonight. Jackson.
Donna, Donald Trump's remarkable day in court lasted far longer than expected. Tonight, the district attorney is giving us a better look at the charges he now faces and what they say is new evidence underlying the case. This was the moment Donald Trump entered the history books, in court and under arrest as the first former president charged with a crime. He left his Manhattan penthouse by motorcade. Posting to his social media seemed so surreal. Wow, they are going to arrest me. Soon after, he turned himself in to the Manhattan district attorney.
President Trump, will you come speak to us? President Trump?
He was immediately fingerprinted and processed, and then arraigned before a judge. He pleaded not guilty to 34 counts relating to falsifying business records. The charges center around alleged hush money payments to 2 women and a doorman before the 2016 election.
He's frustrated, he's upset, but I'll tell you what, he's motivated, and it's not going to stop him. It's not going to slow him down.
Every charge is a felony, part of an alleged conspiracy to bury negative stories that could have hurt Trump's campaign.
Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime.
Outside the court, security concerns kept police on edge as dueling rallies put America's political divide on display.
And if they indict him and hold him and charge him with bogus charges, you as press and me as a citizen, we will never be free.
But today's a very serious day in our country. It's a historic day where finally somebody with so much power, the ex-president, is going to be arrested and hopefully held accountable for his crimes against women. And we hope that this is the first of his crimes that he will be prosecuted.
Trump was kept at a distance from the crowds, released pending trial. The charges will feature heavily in his re-election campaign. There had been questions as to whether or not the former president would be subjected to some sort of gag order to prevent him from discussing the case in light of his inflammatory comments about both the district attorney and the judge who is hearing this trial. But Donna, that wasn't brought to fruition today. Instead, the judge cautioned all parties against saying anything that could incite their supporters toward violence.
Okay, and Trump back in Palm Beach, Florida tonight. Jackson in New York, thanks. Just north of Winnipeg, there's been a tragic discovery at a landfill. An Indigenous woman has been found dead. She's been identified as 33-year-old Linda Mary Beardy. Investigators say she was not a missing person. They believe her body was dumped at the landfill by a garbage truck a few hours before staff at the landfill found it on Monday afternoon. Police say they consider Beardy's death suspicious. They are not classifying it as a homicide. Her death is not believed to be connected to any other investigations or the alleged serial killings last year that left 4 Indigenous women dead. A 35-year-old Winnipeg man is charged with first-degree murder in those cases. The Assembly of First Nations has endorsed an expanded $23 billion settlement to compensate those involved in the child welfare system. The deal is a result of 2 class action lawsuits over harm done to Indigenous children and their families because of the federal government's chronic underfunding of on-reserve child and family services. The revised agreement, which includes more than 13,000 children left out of the original agreement, boosts total compensation by $3 billion.
This in some ways is a sad day, because when you pay compensation, it means that a child has lost their childhood, and that could have been prevented. And I want to see this being the very last compensation payment for children that Canada ever makes, because I'd never want to see our kids victimized again.
The settlement still needs approval from the Human Rights Tribunal and the federal court. If it goes ahead, $40,000 in payments could be distributed to eligible claimants starting later this year. A Quebec man accused of driving his pickup truck into pedestrians in the town of Amqui now faces murder charges. Steve Gagnon was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 9 counts of attempted murder. Police say the 38-year-old intentionally drove a pickup truck into a group of pedestrians on March 13th. He was initially charged with dangerous driving causing death. Chinese Canadians who dare to speak out against the Chinese Communist Party can face daily distressing consequences, threatening phone calls, property damage, family members in China arrested or sent to labor camps. The victims often include oppressed minority and religious groups, such as Uyghurs or followers of the spiritual group Falun Gong. They say they've reported the abuse for years. As Jeff Semple reports, they say their cries for help are finally being heard.
They're a familiar sight on Canadian city streets, followers of Falun Gong, meditating and raising awareness about human rights abuses in China. The Chinese government, which restricts religious freedoms, banned the spiritual practice 24 years ago and calls the group an evil cult. I was arrested twice in China for practicing Falun Gong. Police followed me everywhere, says Q Shaisha. She escaped to Canada in 2014, but never expected Beijing's shadow would follow her here. We are photographed and harassed every week, she says. Hello. Global News spoke with more than a dozen Falun Gong followers and other members of the Chinese diaspora who say they faced surveillance, intimidation, and abuse here in Canada after speaking out against the Chinese Communist Party. Most didn't want to show their faces because they have family in China.
Hi. Nice to see you.
But Michelle Zhang says her family has nothing left to lose.
This persecution must be stopped.
Zhang left China in 1998, just before Beijing's crackdown on Falun Gong. Soon after, her brother-in-law was sent to a labor camp where he died. Then her sister went missing, leaving behind a 2-year-old daughter. Just before her sister disappeared, she called Zhang and left this voicemail.
You have one message.
In the message, her sister describes in detail the persecution of Falun Gong followers in China, which at the time wasn't well documented.
Every day I was in tears. It was a very, very difficult time for me.
Zhang went public with her sister's story and protested outside the Chinese consulate. Soon after, she says, her car, parked outside her Vancouver apartment, had its windows smashed. A man banged on her front door, threatening her children, and human excrement was dumped onto her first-floor balcony.
I suddenly found all the human feces everywhere on the balcony. That was very, very weird. I had no enemies in that city. I realized that the Chinese Communist Party was probably the one who was directing this whole thing.
But she has no proof. She reported the incidents to police to no avail. And she's not alone.
It is widespread, and the main task, it seems to us, is to intimidate and instill fear within diaspora members residing in Canada.
This Uyghur leader says the community has been sounding the alarm for years. He hopes now, following the recent revelations about China's political interference in Canada, people will take their concerns more seriously.
It is very regrettable that it took someone from CSIS to deliberately leak this information. It seems to me that they felt the same as we do, frustration or inaction.
The Chinese consulate did not respond to our request for comment, but it has consistently denied allegations of intimidation and interference campaigns, claiming they're nothing more than attempts to sabotage the prosperity and stability of China. Donna?
Jeff Semple in Toronto tonight. Thanks. Russian investigators have charged a 26-year-old woman with terrorism in the death of a prominent pro-war military blogger. Daria Trepova appeared in a Moscow court accused in the cafe bombing that killed Vladimir Tatarsky in St. Petersburg on Sunday. He was meeting with supporters and more than 30 people were injured. Russia released video of Trepova, likely recorded under duress, admitting she brought a statuette to the cafe that later blew up. She said she did not know it would explode. Russia claims Ukrainian intelligence orchestrated the attack. Ukraine hasn't directly responded to that. An historic moment for Finland and for NATO today. After decades of remaining neutral, Finland has joined NATO, its flag hoisted beside the 30 other members of the world's biggest security alliance. The Nordic nation decided to join after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year. It means NATO's land border with Russia has now doubled. Eric Sorensen explains the significance of this big geopolitical shift.
NATO wasted no time convening its first meeting with Finland as a member.
It is a great day for Finland. Security and stability are those elements which we feel very strongly.
Finland will get an ironclad security guarantee. Article 5, our collective defense clause, one for all for one, will now, from today, apply for Finland.
Finland has a strong armed forces with military conscription and thousands of reservists. But after years as fiercely unaligned, Finland finally saw in Russia an existential threat.
Finns understood that if you are a military non-allied country next to a nuclear power that talks about the use of nuclear powers, you really need to get to under a nuclear umbrella yourself as well.
Russia's Vladimir Putin did not comment on NATO's latest expansion while touring a rail factory, but he is well aware of Russia's territorial losing streak against the alliance. At one time, Russia created and controlled the Soviet Union, more than a dozen republics, including Ukraine, and the Soviet Union established the Warsaw Pact, adding 7 more European countries under its influence, an iron curtain separating them from NATO. But the Soviet Union broke apart. Eastern European countries began to join NATO, as did some former Soviet republics. Russia did not want Ukraine to be one more. Yet its war there has prompted unaligned Finland to join NATO right on Russia's border.
Finland would never have done this had it not been for Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So this is a matter of Putin creating more insecurity for himself through the aggression that he's visited upon his neighbor.
On l'espère. La Suède.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister said NATO hopes Sweden will be next to join, but it's Finland where the change is profound. Its long border now on the front lines between NATO and Russia. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
As the push grows to invest in green energy, a Canadian bank is helping fund a coal mine operator. How that company says the money is being spent. Coming up. Data obtained by Global News shows RBC is one of 25 banks that help provide more than $5 billion U.S. in financing to a German company expanding a controversial coal mine. Police removed climate activists, including Greta Thunberg, from that site earlier this year. And last month, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, demanded an end to the funding of coal projects so that countries can meet their emissions reduction targets. Redmond Shannon reports.
In January, thousands of people gathered in a soggy field in western Germany to try and stop the expansion of a huge coal mine. Many camped out for months in a village set to be demolished as part of the expansion. Among those detained by police, the world's most famous climate activist, Greta Thunberg.
And as long as the carbon is in the ground, this struggle is not over.
Today, the Garzweiler lignite mine stretches across 35 square kilometres, producing 30 million tonnes of coal a year. Its expansion westward needed the villages of Lützerath and Immerath to be vacated. Now that they are, mine operator and German energy giant RWE can soon dig for coal. Global News has learned from financial data firm Refinitiv that in 2022, Canada's largest bank, RBC, was among 25 banks that combined to offer credit lines worth more than $5 billion to RWE. That despite a public commitment by RBC in 2020 to restrict some funding of companies opening new coal mines. But that policy doesn't necessarily apply to companies expanding mines. Richard Brooks is the Climate Finance Director with environmental NGO Stand Earth.
Well, you look at all the policies that the Canadian banks have in regards to coal, and they have so many loopholes in them that you could drive a coal excavator through those loopholes.
RBC told Global News it doesn't comment on client matters. RWE told Global News that the money is used to finance green growth and normal working capital needs. The company says the mine expansion is needed to protect Germany's energy security and supply as the war in Ukraine rages on. Brooks says RWE can do whatever it wants with the credit lines.
There's no restrictions put in place to ensure that money is going into climate solution or renewables project. And what takes a lot of money is expanding fossil fuel infrastructure.
Brooks and others lodged a complaint with the Canadian Competition Bureau last year concerning alleged deceptive marketing practices at RBC regarding its climate claims. The Bureau's investigation is ongoing. RBC says it believes the complaint to be unfounded. Data shows the credit lines were classified as sustainability-linked loans, a type of loan designed to incentivize companies to meet certain green or sustainable targets, like increasing the use of renewables. But RWE's targets are self-imposed.
If you're your own referee, right, you're not going to penalize yourself or put yourself in a corner, even if it's in the public interest to reduce, exposure to fossil fuels. You're going to do what's the profitable thing.
Tariq Fancy is a former investment banker with BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager. He is now a critic of the current rules governing sustainable finance.
I call it putting green paint on existing financial products.
At RBC
has set a goal of $500 billion in sustainable financing by 2025. But the bank remains one of the world's biggest investors in fossil fuel projects. Fancy says tougher rules are needed to discourage that.
It has to be government regulation. It has to be mandatory compliance rather than voluntary compliance, because we can't rely on them voluntarily to do that because it's not in their financial interests and they're not built to do that.
In the meantime, RBC shareholders will vote on committing to more concrete emission investment targets at its AGM on Wednesday. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
After decades of lobbying ahead, which province will benefit from the expansion of the federal shipbuilding plan? The federal government has reached a deal to add Quebec shipyard Chantier Davie as the third shipyard in its multi-billion-dollar ship procurement plan. It was excluded from the original shipbuilding plan back in 2011.
There was work that needed to be done rigorously to demonstrate, among other things, that there was going to be sufficient amounts of work, not just for the two existing shipyards, but for a third significant shipyard.
Negotiations will now begin around the construction of 7 new icebreakers. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the contracts are estimated to be worth about $8.5 billion. Voters in Prince Edward Island have given Progressive Conservative leader Dennis King a second term as Premier. The PCs won a commanding majority in yesterday's vote, taking 22 of the 27 seats in the legislature.
That verdict is that positive politics is alive and well in Prince Edward Island.
The Liberals edged out the Green Party as the official opposition by a single seat. Cash crash landing. Next, Richard Branson's multi-billion-dollar rocket company files for bankruptcy. One of the world's most successful and flamboyant entrepreneurs suffered a setback today. Virgin Orbit, Richard Branson's satellite launching company, has filed for bankruptcy protection. Mike Armstrong explains how a multi-billion-dollar venture fell back to earth after a failed launch earlier this year.
It was, from day one, a bit of a gamble.
Virgin Orbit's business was sending small satellites into space, not with a rocket from a launch pad, but with a rocket dropped from a modified 747. What that meant was a launch service that could go anywhere there was a long enough runway. If a country had a satellite to send up, Virgin Orbit could go to them.
Which is quite unique. Usually you would bring your satellite to a launcher, not the other way around.
Now, what went wrong? Well, the company made big news back in January with a failed launch from the UK.
It appears that Launcher 1 has suffered an anomaly.
The rocket didn't make it out to space, and its cargo, including British and American intelligence satellites, ended up in the ocean.
Absolutely devastated. We put our heart and soul into this.
Using our Launcher 1 vehicle.
Even before that high-profile failure, the company was already struggling. It had launched 4 rockets successfully and 33 satellites, but it wasn't growing. Instead, it was burning through cash.
Liftoff.
Competition was a problem. Traditional rockets are able to launch more satellites at a time and of different sizes, big and small. The other problem was the industry. Times are tough.
That they're having a tough ride on the stock exchange. Hence why several launch companies are actually struggling, and not limited to Virgin.
I was once a child with a dream.
Richard Branson spun Virgin Orbit off from his space tourism company, Virgin Galactic, in 2017. It went public at a valuation of about $4 billion. As it files for bankruptcy protection, in the last 5 years, it's lost close to 99% of its share price. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
Competitive field, that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Dildo, Newfoundland and Labrador. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.